The honourable member for Scarborough-Guildwood.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you for this opportunity to speak on this very important issue. There's not that many times in the life of a parliamentarian where you get to speak on the issue of sending men and women in uniform into harm's way, and I am appreciative of that privilege. I do regret that more colleagues are actually not able to stand in their place and talk about the significance of this moment. However, it is what it is, and the government has chosen to limit the amount of commentary on this matter. Mr. Speaker, the rush to war frequently is done in terms of these are the good guys and these are the bad guys. And the problem with this entire conflict is that the good guys and the bad guys are a bit of a mix. And so I just thought that we should do a canvass, Mr. Speaker, of the countries that are in the immediate area. For instance, one of the allies, one of the so-called good guys is Saudi Arabia. Now, Saudi Arabia is the spiritual home to Wahhabism and Salafism. And that is the touchstone, the spiritual home of ISIS. Within Saudi society, there is a great deal of conflict, and some argue that wealthy Saudis are those that sponsor ISIS. Those that puts the House of Saud, the government of Saudi Arabia, in a very difficult situation. And I join with our ambassador for religious freedom, who called upon Saudi Arabia, and a variety of other countries in and around that Middle East area to deal with this particularly pernicious form of Islam. And so, Mr. Speaker, these kinds of internal conflicts within our allies make the effectiveness of our presence, well, maybe they undermine the effectiveness of our presence. And I would say that, we are responding to a moral imperative here. And so in that respect, I think all members of this House are on the same page. Having said that, Mr. Speaker, our interventions in this part of the world have not gone well in recent history and even in history further back. So, Mr. Speaker, Saudi Arabia is a society that doesn't tolerate forms of religious expression other than a very strict form of Sunni Islam. And indeed, Mr. Speaker, it is known that there are beheadings if, in fact, this kind of rebellion against this kind of Salafism or Wahhabism takes place within Saudi Arabia. So, Mr. Speaker, this makes it very difficult for we as a Western society, even we as a country motivated for the best of reasons, to intervene because of this, how should we say, spiritual support for the founders of ISIS. And then if we go around the horn a bit, Mr. Speaker, Iran. Now, Iran has been the chief beneficiary of the Bush-Iraq war. Baghdad is a satellite office of Tehran, and that is arguably some of the source for ISIS, the grievance of Sunni Muslims against Shia Muslims. So up until recently, much to the chagrin of the U.S. and other Western powers, with the manipulation of Tehran on Baghdad, this has in some respects created the difficulty that ISIS is responding to. And that in and of itself makes it very difficult. Now, Mr. Speaker, up until recently, it was the view of this government that Iran was the chief sponsor of state terrorism and was considered to be the #1 state terrorist threat in the world. Now, Mr. Speaker, they're apparently going to be our allies in the fighting of the ISIS threat. And as you know, Mr. Speaker, Iran has been the supporter of Hezbollah. And Hezbollah has been the chief Shia terrorist entity, threatens Israel on the one side, threatens Lebanon on the other side, and has joined in with President Assad in that conflict, which has created literally hundreds of thousands of refugees and literally hundreds of thousands of deaths. Up until recently, the papers were full of what President Assad had done to his own people, including gassing them, Mr. Speaker. So it becomes a little complicated, Mr. Speaker, since the chief sponsor of Hezbollah and therefore the supporter of President Assad is now our ally in the support of this conflict with ISIS. And then, Mr. Speaker, we just move over beside Iran to Turkey. Turkey has been in a 20, 30-year fight with the PKK, which is the supporters of the Peshmerga. And the Peshmerga are the chief fighters on the ground, Mr. Speaker, resisting ISIS. And so, Mr. Speaker, Turkey is in a difficult position, shall we say, because they have had this conflict literally over quite a number of years, and they regard the PKK as a terrorist entity. And as a colleague has said, as has Canada. I'm not quite sure he's right, but nevertheless, a number of the parties, militias in the areas, we recognize as terrorist entities. And sometimes they're on our side in this particular fight. Most of the time, or up until recently, they've been on the other side. And so, Mr. Speaker, we're entering into this area where at any given day, it's hard to tell good guys from bad guys. I don't know how Turkey's parliament arrived at their decision as not only a NATO partner, but a NATO partner that will enter into supporting the ISIS mission. But they have a lot of internal conflicts, and a lot of those internal conflicts will work out in Kurdistan, which is really the center of this particular conflict. So the Peshmerga will have to keep one eye on ISIS and the other eye on the Turkish forces, and simultaneously the Peshmerga will have to keep an eye on ISIS and another eye on the Iranian National Guard, who are fighting in parallel against the ISIS threat. All of which, Mr. Speaker, makes it very difficult to pick out, if you will, moral high ground. And let me give you an example of why, or of where we are. We supported the Libyan conflict, for instance, and I think we actually did the right thing. But, Mr. Speaker, we'll be bombing the people that we were supporting in the Libyan conflict. And so it becomes somewhat difficult to, if you will, pick out the good guys from the bad guys. And as I said earlier, we actually have had no record of success. And ultimately, Mr. Speaker, there are those, and I would include the religious ambassador in this view, that think that this is ultimately a dispute between Sunni Islam and Shia Islam. And Mr. Speaker, that will be a conflict where I doubt that we will have that much to contribute. So, Mr. Speaker, I join with the Liberal Party in its hesitation and recognize that we are entering into a conflict, as I say, where we've got no history of success. Thank you.
Questions and comments? Question et commentaires. The Honourable Minister of State.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate that. I think I'm getting a bit concerned about the Liberals attempting to position us as having an ally in some of the evil that exists over there. The fact is, these are not our allies. I say this with great respect for the member. These are not our allies. We happen to have a common enemy. And that in itself should tell the member how serious the ISIL threat really is. Now, if ISIS, who are beheading innocent people right now, at this moment, while we deliberate, if these folks are not our enemies, then how did the Taliban ever become our enemy? And how does the member reconcile sending Canadian troops on the ground, ill-equipped, to fight someone that isn't even as bad as ISIS, if that's possible? How does the member reconcile those decisions?
The Honourable Member for Scarborough-Guildwood.
Well, Mr. Speaker, it's interesting that the Taliban was initially created by the CIA. The CIA created the Taliban in Afghanistan in order to be able to push the Russians out of the country. That in turn led to al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda then perpetrated its misery on Afghanistan, Pakistan, and the rest of us for the last decade or so. Then, once that conflict was over, it went to Syria. And in Syria, it then got into a dispute with the ISIS folks. And so the ISIS folks don't actually think that al-Qaeda is serious enough terrorist Islamic organization. So the irony is, Mr. Speaker, we put our foot in it and we create difficulties way beyond our imagining, and therefore we should be very hesitant to get involved in this conflict. I buy the argument that we have to put as much support to those who are being persecuted, the Kurds, the Yazidis, the Christians, et cetera, I'm on side for that. But don't be so naive as to make the same idiotic mistakes all over again.
Questions and comments? Question et commentaires. The Honourable Member for Vaudreuil-Soulanges.
And I'm glad to hear this member's consideration of the complexity of the region and bringing up questions such as the Kurdistan Workers' Party involvement. And he mentioned the Libya mission. We also supported the Libya mission when it was clear and outlined and sanctioned by the UN. My question for the member, though, was given his understanding of the complexity and the involvement of the Kurdistan Workers' Party in this conflict, how could the Liberal Party originally approve the 30-day mission knowing that some of these terrorist groups might have been involved in the conflict?
Honourable Member for Scarborough-Guildwood.
Actually, I appreciate that question because I think it's as much as anything an approach. I buy the argument that this is a very serious conflict. I buy the argument that there's butchery going on. I buy the argument that you could even argue that it's a genocide. And so when the Prime Minister came to your party and to mine and invited us over to actually see what was happening, then you can support that limited engagement. He's made no such effort since then. And so here we are, we're, an hour from the vote, and yet has the Prime Minister invite your leader or mine and to disclose information that he cannot disclose in a public setting.
Questions and comments? Question et commentaires. The L'Honourable Député de Saint-Léonard, Saint-Michel.
I'm sorry, Adam. I was just wondering, in terms of having this member being a former national defense critic, what would be our military's role? How does he see the Liberal Party taking a role in this mission? And secondly, the fact that he just spoke about the Prime Minister and the lack of, as many of us said, lack of trust or transparency this Prime Minister has shown. Can he expand on that? Thank you, Mr.
The honourable member for Scarborough-Guildwood. No, we don't have a lot of time.
As you know, Mr. Speaker, I've played a number of roles in this Parliament over the years. One of my favorites, frankly, was as defence critic for the Liberal Party. I became a huge fan of our military folks, and we in the Liberal Party support these folks to the hilt. Once this vote is taken, we know what will be asked of them, and it'll be a very serious ask of them. We do take objection to the mandate of their mission. We do think that we need to tread very lightly. Only fools rush in where angels fear to tread. And in this particular instance, Mr. Speaker, history, complications, and as Jeffrey Simpson said in the Globe and Mail, the whole cauldron of conflicting issues should make us all very cautious indeed.
Resuming debate. Reprise de débat. The honourable President.